that too. So between us, we would look at everything very hard to try and see what should we be doing next. It's talking to us. Let's listen.
Yeah,
right?
and the girdle that you had on the first block didn't you have a Mylodon girdle on it?
Yes, we did.
And you considered that to be almost, what, overthinking the process?
No, it was
over-engineering?
It was a precaution just in case
Right.
we really do need it, because everybody either had the stuff coming out the bottom or they had a bunch of stuff trying to hold it in so it wouldn't come out the bottom, the crankshaft, the rods, or whatever, right?
Right.
And so we did it just because we didn't know that, we didn't want to have it, but
it was better to be safe than sorry.
yes.
Yeah.
But later you got away, you didn't use it?
Oh yeah, no, that first engine had the girdle on it all the way till it finally expired heroically at about 450 runs or something. And that was the end of but by that time we knew we didn't need it. It was just part of our act.
Did you ever use those steel straps on top of the caps and
Oh,
future motors?
you had to use those because...
So that replaced the girdle, the steel straps?
Yes. Because a lot of guys would take junkyard motors and just put nitro in them, and the main caps would just break. So you just machine the cap off and put that bar on.
Mm. Do you remember where your stud kits came from?
No, not the first ones. At that time, most of it came from speed shops.
Mm-hmm.
And you just, whatever brand you thought was the best or people had the best luck with, that's what you bought.
Right. On the oiling system, you modified the oil pump with your own like strainers / pump cover assembly?
Yeah.
Where did that idea come from?
Um,
Because nobody really had that at the time. I don't
No, they did. People did. People were experimenting with that, and Bob Skinner was all over that. And he ended up making our first, or he probably made all of them, that little pickup thing.
Mm-hmm. And then later on, he also made the screw-on filter adapter.
The oil filter, yes.
But originally, you had the canister style.
The stock Chrysler just turned around so it
sideways.
would package nicely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then Bob Skinner and we got on a complete oil filter experiment.
Explain that.
Well, the filters, you can buy different brands, right? The Fram and the this and the that.
AC or something.
Yeah. And so we just bought all of them, and we tore them apart and studied how they were made, and then saw what the nitro did to the glue, because when you took the filter off, we would cut it apart and examine it, which most people started doing. For one thing, just to see if little flakes of metal and just see what's coming apart inside your engine.
When you're doing your filter examinations, was it shocking how poorly made some were?
Oh, yes.
Like, oh my God.
They were disgusting.
What did you finally end up with?
I don't know.
I've seen pictures of the AC on the car.
That wasn't our favorite. Our favorite, I think, was a cheap one that came from Kmart or something. I don't remember.
Yeah.
One of those articles that was in Hot Rod Magazine tells the brand that we settled on.
Mm-hmm.
Because it took us several months to figure out what the hot tip was.
Now, the grinding of the crank, if it's all right to ask about that. I remember you said you took your crank initially to a place and the crank was taken care of for $5. What?
No, the very first crankshaft we got from Reith Automotive.
Yeah.
And it had all the known tricks that you could do.
Okay.
And Henry Velasco was there at the time?
Oh yeah, Henry Velasco was there. So you know you're getting the best quality. And it had all the tricks that, well, you should have this, and you should chrome the journals, and you should, all this
Big
stuff.
radius fillets and all that stuff.
And so whatever they sold, we bought. And it was very expensive, nice crankshaft, right? And that crank, it was part of the 450 run deal, and then it became a 3-piece crank.
Yeah.
But by that time, we figured out that you don't really need any of that. And so we just take a junkyard crankshaft, and we would take it down to this Piston Supply, a wholesale engine rebuilder in L.A., and we were getting them ground for, I think, $7. And then all we do is balance them, have them balanced where they put some heavy metal in them. Because your bob weight's different because you're using heavier parts than stock. And we used those for a long time, and then the main bearing started looking a little edgy, and the crank had little shiny spots on it, so you could tell the journals weren't round anymore. So we pulled out all the stops, and we went back to Reith, and got Henry Velasco to grind a stock crank with none of the tricks. Just grind it like it's going to go in. We're rebuilding a passenger car engine, and they were $28, and that was our crank from then on out.
A stock crank that got ground by Henry
That was
for $28, and that was your hot setup for a crankshaft running 98%.
Yes,
Okay.
that was it.
Chrysler bearings?
No, you use some aftermarket brand. I don't remember what they were, but just one of the bearings you could buy at the
Copper head gaskets?
No, copper head gaskets hadn't been invented yet. We just used composition head gaskets, and it had O-ring
Rings.
wires
Mm-hmm.
put in the head with a piano wire or copper wire.
Were the heads stock when you first assembled the motor?
No, we ported them. I ported them at the Red Apple, and we just kind of gave it a nice, just whatever looked right, whatever that meant. But and then
Oversized valves?
oh yeah, for sure we had oversized valves. But all that stuff was well known because everybody had been doing this for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And what went wrong when you use too big of valves, they tangle because the valves are going like this. And things get thin down where the spark plug hole is. And anyway, there's sort of some compromises you end up making. So the only real variable in the whole thing is what you do on the ports.
Mm-hmm.
And over time we found out that, well, a lot of people found out that when you make the exhaust ports way too big or the intake ports way too big, it just doesn't work because the velocity goes away.
And the fuel starts falling out of suspension, and then you get all kinds of problems.
Yeah, and it just doesn't fill the cylinder well.
Yeah.
Did you ever experiment with filling the block or
No,
the
never
heads?
did that.
Just put water in it, and away you went.
Yeah. Let me back up to the theory part of the engine. I've tried to explain this numerous times over the years, and I've never really had very, very good luck at it. But in my study of nitromethane, any fuel that you're liable to use in an engine can either burn or it can detonate. And they're two separate events. They have two different chemical reactions. They're just different, right? Different amounts of energy released in different ways. And a good example would be the caps, like in a kid's cap gun. I don't know, probably don't have them anymore, but what you had years ago, a little cap gun. If you took those little caps, laid them on the ground, and took your hammer and hit them, they would go boom and bang. They'd detonate, right? And then you could light that strip of caps with a match, and it'd just go fizzle, fizzle. There was no boom. It just burned, right? And that's the difference between detonating and burning. They're two different reactions, same item. One involves pressure, and both of them involve heat, and one involves pressure.
And time.
Time's a factor in the whole thing. But pressure is what makes the detonation happen, is pressure, right? Okay, so if you study fuels, people nowadays probably don't remember, but like in old-time cars, when you put it in high gear way too soon and then hit the gas, they would rattle.
Yeah,
The engine would rattle.
start lugging.
Yeah, and it's because the piston isn't getting away, letting the pressure off. Pressure's building from the combustion. Piston isn't going away, so it'll detonate part of it. And that's what that little pinging is, right? And but it's caused by the pressure, right? So that was the key piece on keeping the compression ratio way down. Is we got to limit the pressure. To make the detonation not be there, and the detonation is what's trying to push the crankshaft out on the ground.
And what was a common compression ratio for other teams at the time?
I don't know in numbers, because everybody talked about it in how far the piston was down from coming up to the deck of the engine,
Right.
deck high where the piston would come up to the top of the
So a
deck.
common deck height would be
At
like,
the
like
time,
100 down, 200 down.
yeah, that was common at the time. 100
Okay.
down, 200
And
thousandths.
and
So
you
a tenth of an inch, 2/10 of an inch.
and you started where?
I think about 450 thousandths.
So you're already double down the normal distance.
More than double the normal
Yeah.
distance. Yeah.
Right.
And these are flat top pistons, all of them, right?
Yeah,
All of
once the piston got down, when you lowered the piston height, the piston doesn't, it only comes up within, say, a half inch of the deck. There's plenty of room for the valve, so you don't even need the little niches in the piston, right? And when they were higher, you had to put little niches, because when the valves would open, the piston up high, and it had to have a little clearance, right? Anyway, this study of the detonation and burning and the use of the fuel is what kind of governed the decisions on how we were going to go about this, the low compression and so on. And then another factor in all of this is atomizing the fuel, because nitromethane is very heavy. It's 11-12% heavier than water, and like alcohol or gasoline is what, say 3/4 of water, real round number. Anyway, it's very heavy, and if you pour straight nitro on the ground, it'll just stay there on the concrete. It'll just stay there.
It's not aromatic. It doesn't evaporate.
It doesn't evaporate very fast, and if you throw matches at it, it won't even light. The straight nitro, true straight nitro with no additives, right? And so you got to atomize the stuff, turn it into a fuel vapor instead of a fuel liquid, right? And so anyway, that became a key piece as we got into the fuel injection and so on later. But also it's a key piece in the detonation, because if you have part of the fuel as a vapor and part of it as a liquid, the vapor part burns, creates pressure and heat, and when the liquid part gets squeezed hard enough, it goes boom. And that's what breaks the cylinder walls, and depending on how bad it goes boom as to what it's going to break. Anyway, so that whole package was the foundation of the whole, how we're going to go about this, and what made our parts reliable, because our parts weren't any stronger than anybody else's parts. Our junkyard parts were just junkyard parts,
But the loads you were putting on them were less of a shock and more of a push.
There we go.
You weren't trying to drive the crankshaft out the bottom of the block. You're trying to rotate it, where when the detonation would occur, it was just trying to push everything out.
Yeah, and the bad thing about detonation is it happens when the piston's up at its highest point. And when it's at its highest point, it's not trying to rotate the crankshaft, it's just trying to push the crankshaft, because the crankshaft hasn't come over center and where the push can cause the rotation, right? And so that's when the detonations would be right up at the top. And that's why you would see those deals where the crankshaft would come right out on the ground, right off the starting line. They'd bog the engine would slow down, so the piston isn't getting out of the way of
what's about to happen.
and then it detonates. Boom.
And the pressure's got nowhere to go but down.
Yeah. And the detonation's coming out. I mean, that's the theory behind hand grenades and